Tonight, you are not in a bright room with easy heat humming through hidden pipes. You are not reaching for a snack without thinking, or tapping a glass and expecting water to arrive obediently, clear and ordinary, from somewhere behind the wall. Tonight, you are stepping back into a season that demanded more from ordinary people than most of us ever have to imagine. You are going to an Edwardian farm where winter was not a mood, not a photograph, not a quiet dusting on the hedge. It was a long examination. It asked what had been saved, what had been mended, what had been learned from the last hard year, and whether a family could keep enough warmth in their hands, enough food on their shelves, and enough gentleness in their voices to last until the land forgave them. And if this is the sort of quiet history you like to end the day with, you can settle in here and let the night carry you. There is no need to hurry. We are only going to walk slowly into the cold and listen. So let the room around you soften a little. Let the corners blur. Let the sounds nearest to you become harmless. You do not have to tense for anything sudden. This is a long road made of frost on glass, steam rising from soup, the weight of quilts, the scrape of boots on the back step, the low complaint of wood in the stove, and the kind of patience that used to keep whole households alive. You can follow the story the way a hand follows the grain in an old table. Nothing is rushed, nothing is sharp for long. When the wind gets louder, we will move closer to the fire. When the work grows heavy, we will come back to the kitchen. When the dark presses against the windows, someone in the house will still be breathing near you. Someone will still be stirring something warm, and the night will go on doing what nights do, which is to pass. The house itself is not much to look at from the lane. A low farmhouse with a roof that has endured more weather than beauty, a lean barn, a yard beaten hard by boots and hooves, and hedges that keep their own counsel. But once you know the place, by smell and by sound, it becomes less a building than a rhythm. The front room is kept mostly for formality and drafts. The kitchen is the true heart, all stove-black warmth and hooks and pans and steam. The pantry smells of grain dust, old apples, and wood. The stairs creak differently on the left than on the right, a fact everyone knows, and no one explains. One sister can find a candle in the dark by memory alone. One brother knows which bucket leaks from which seam. Your mother can tell by the smell of the air near the back door whether rain is coming, and your father by the look of the yard after sunset whether the morning will bite. Your grandmother does not trust the clock half so much as the sky. She says houses teach you if you live inside them long enough. This one teaches thrift, repetition, and the exact distance between hardship and comfort. You wake before full light, because there is too much to do before the freeze locks the fields. The window is milky with cold, and the room has the pinched stillness of late autumn before the season turns severe. When you sit up, the blankets release a little private pocket of warmth, and you almost resent the day for asking more of you. But it will ask more anyway. By the time your feet find the floorboards, you already know the shape of the hours ahead. Pulling roots, carrying crates, stripping the last leaves from whatever has held on longer than expected, lifting, sorting, stacking, and trying not to look too often at the edge of the field where the ground has started to stiffen into something unfriendly. Outside, the air has that bright, thin edge that makes your teeth aware of themselves. Breath leaves you in pale clouds. The grass in the yard is silver. Somewhere beyond the orchard, a rook makes one offended sound and falls silent, as if even birds understand that this is not the time for conversation. All through the garden and the lower field there are things still to be brought in. Not much, never enough to calm a person completely, but enough to matter. Late cabbages with their leaves folded tight as secrets. Parsnips long and stubborn under the earth, beetroot staining your fingertips, small onions strung in loops, a few apples in the trees, cold and hard and sweeter than they have any right to be. The work is not dramatic. That is what makes it so relentless. No trumpet, no battle cry, just the repetition of bending, twisting, pulling, carrying. Everyone moves with the same practical urgency. Your father forks up the last potatoes from a patch that yielded less than hoped. Your mother crouches over baskets, separating what will keep from what must be eaten first. Your younger brother drags sacks that appear to be almost as large as he is. Your sister works along the row of leeks, scarf slipping, hands red, too intent to care. You are all tired already, and it is not yet noon. This, you begin to understand, is one of winter's first tricks. It exhausts you before it arrives. The last days before the hard freeze always feel a little unreal, as if the whole farm has been asked to hold its breath. Every recovered thing seems small when held in the hand, and enormous when imagined in January. A basket of apples is not a basket of apples. It is the possibility of something sweet when the sky has gone leaden for weeks. A sack of turnips is not merely a sack. It is broth, mash, roast slices, thin soup, stretched to one more meal, and that quiet, stubborn feeling of having prepared at least a little against what is coming. You feel this every time you place one more crate on the hand cart. The objects are ordinary. Their future is not. By afternoon your wrists ache and your shoulders feel threaded with wire. The orchard ladder rocks in the soft earth. You climb anyway because there are still 3 apples near the top branch where the tree leans toward the wall. The bark is cold through your glove. One apple slips from your hand and lands in the grass with a muffled thud. Another comes away clean and sits in your palm, red with a bloom of frost on the skin. For a moment you hold it to your face and smell the faint sweetness beneath the cold, and that little scent of fruit and skin and autumn sunlight is enough to soften you. Winter has not yet erased everything, not yet. Inside the barn, the hayloft keeps a different kind of air, dusty, warm, sweet with feed, dull with animal breath. The cows turn their broad heads as you enter. A pony stamps and tosses once. The goats are already practicing the look they will wear for most of the season. The one that says any inconvenience at all is a personal insult. You look over the stalls and think not only of the animals themselves, but of what they mean in the months ahead. Milk, if they stay healthy, heat, even if no one likes to say it too plainly, noise in the dark, proof that life is continuing around you and not only shrinking inward. When the light begins to thin, everyone starts moving faster, not because there is strength left for it, but because dusk in late autumn comes with a kind of finality. The last cart goes toward the house. The last basket is set near the back step. Cold gathers in the ruts of the yard. Someone laughs at nothing much, just because a sack tips over and turnips roll like awkward little cannonballs into the chicken's path. The laugh sounds too loud for the evening, and then perfectly right. You hold on to it. The root cellar waits below the kitchen, behind a door that sticks in damp weather and complains in dry weather. You lift the latch and step down into earth-cool dark. The air changes at once. Damp stone, clay, dust, the round clean smell of potatoes, wooden shelves, glass jars reflecting the lantern in soft blinks. Here the world becomes order. Bins for roots, crates for apples wrapped in paper, strings of onions, crocks sealed in cloth and wax, jars of pear preserve, carrot pickle, damson jam, beans. Not luxuries, not really, but a kind of architecture. A private wall built against the emptiness of February. The cellar work takes days because food always takes more time once it has crossed the threshold. Potatoes must be checked for soft patches. Apples laid so they do not bruise each other. Beans dried long enough, but not damp when bagged. Cabbages set where air can move around them. Your mother has a way of lifting a jar into the light and seeing immediately whether it will last. Your grandmother knocks on apple crates with one bent knuckle and listens as if they are instruments. Your father brings in flour from the miller in stiff white sacks that leave ghosts on the floorboards wherever they rest. The pantry slowly fills with the blunt, comforting shapes of winter eating. Oats, barley, salt, lard, dried peas, a little tea, not enough sugar. Never enough sugar. There is satisfaction in the stacking itself, in taking what was scattered under open sky and arranging it into rows and shelves and corners, in learning again that survival has a texture. It is rough sackcloth and smooth glass. It is the papery skin of onions under your thumb. It is a loop of twine biting into your palm when you hoist something heavy. It is also the kind of quiet that comes after the lantern is lowered and the cellar door is shut, and you know that under the floor, waiting in the dark, there is enough to make tomorrow imaginable. By evening the kitchen seems almost luxurious, though the luxury is simply this. The lamp has been lit, the soup is hot, and no one needs to carry another basket through the dark. Your mother trims the wick, your father rubs flour from his sleeves, your sister presses both hands around a mug as if warmth can be persuaded to climb directly into her bones. The room smells of onion broth, damp cuffs drying by the stove, and the faint sharpness of apples cooling on the windowsill. You feel the shape of the day settling into your muscles. It is a heavy feeling, but not a bad one. It says the right work has been done. It says the house is a little better prepared than it was yesterday. It says that for this one evening, winter is still outside the door and not fully in the room. Morning changes the question, not what has been stored, but what will burn. You wake to a colder silence, the kind that tells you the stove gave up during the night, and the walls have spent hours losing the argument with the dark. Even before you are fully awake, your body knows it. The quilt is a nation. The room beyond it is exile. Somewhere downstairs, an iron lid lifts. Somewhere in the yard, the first heavy strike of an axe lands and sends a flat sound through the frozen air. Fuel day again. You dress by instinct. One shirt, then another. Stockings pulled over yesterday's chill. Wool scratched over skin that has forgotten what comfort feels like. A scarf tucked close, coat half stiff at the elbows. By the time you are ready, you feel padded, thickened, less like a person than an arrangement of layers designed to keep one warm pulse in the middle. Outside, the woodpile is rimed white. Your father hands you the smaller axe, with the same expression a priest might wear if he were offering a sacrament made of hard labour. The first dozen logs go badly. Your hands do not want to close. Your shoulders are all complaint. The grain twists unexpectedly. One block tips instead of splitting and nearly catches your ankle. But eventually the work finds you. Swing, pause, strike. Lift, stack. Winter loves repetition, and to survive it, you must learn to love it a little too, or at least stop resisting. Chips, leap, breath fogs, your nose runs in the cold, and you ignore it somewhere behind the barn. Your brother is gathering smaller branches and muttering at them as if insults might make them easier to carry. By the time you take armfuls inside, the kitchen has shrunk into one bright island around the stove. This is how Edwardian warmth often worked in houses like this, not as a condition, but as a territory, one room habitable, one corner enviable, one chair closest to the fire, and therefore fought over politely. The rest of the house exists on sufferance, bedrooms that feel like storage chests for blankets, hallways that might as well belong to another climate, a washstand so cold the basin looks judgmental. Coal enters the season like a rumour of wealth and a warning both at once. It burns longer and hotter, but it never arrives free. A neighbour comes with 2 sacks in the cart, and your father walks him to the gate after, standing longer than necessary in the yard, because men sometimes prefer to finish uncomfortable talk under open sky. When he comes back in, his face looks set in that particular way, which means a bargain has been made that no one especially likes. A spring piglet promised 2 days of help mending fencing in thaw weather. Something valuable later, for something necessary now. That is winter arithmetic. You do it with feed, with fuel, with energy, with days. The coal changes the stove's mood. It makes the metal sides glow with a deeper heat and sends a stronger smell into the air. Thick and mineral, a little bitter at the back of the throat. Soon, the wallpaper above the chimney breast darkens by another shade. Soot begins its patient conquest of everything. Tea towels, kettle, curtains, the inside of your lungs you suspect. Your grandmother calls it good honest heat. You suspect honesty has little to do with it. Still, when a room that yesterday made your fingers ache now lets you sit with your shoulders unclenched, morality becomes less interesting than temperature. Life narrows around the stove. Bread rises near it. Socks steam near it. A pan of dripping is kept soft on its edge. Bricks are heated, wrapped in cloth, and slipped between blankets. Wet mittens are arranged like surrendered birds along the rail. The dog, recognizing empire when he sees it, relocates permanently to a patch of hearth where he lies curled and blissful, lifting one eyelid only when anyone passes too close. Your younger brother claims the warmest floorboard by instinct and can be shifted only with food. The clothing becomes part of the architecture as well. Wool on wool, the same cardigan repaired so often that the original garment has become more memory than fabric. Scarves that smell of smoke and skin, and the inside of drawers. A pair of bed socks so dense with darning that they have all the elegance of a fortified wall. Your grandmother rubs mustard and lard into aching knees, and says the sting means it is working. Your mother warms flannel by the stove before handing it to your sister, who wraps it around her hands with reverence. In a winter like this, warmth is not one big blessing. It is 100 tiny rescues. At dinner, the family sits close enough that elbows knock. Soup thickened with barley and bits of salt pork, bread cut carefully, not because manners are refined, but because the loaf is finite. Conversation rises and falls in low tides. Someone says the cow looks offended by the weather. Someone else says the weather looks offended by the cow. A joke goes around the table, and improves by a little each time it is repeated. Then, the room brightens for a moment, not from the stove, but from that ordinary thing people do in hard seasons when they decide, however briefly, not to sound defeated. Later, when everyone drifts toward bed, there is still the ritual of banking the fire, ashes drawn over the glow, one last log placed to hold until dawn. One last look into the stove's red mouth. You stand for a moment with the lid open and feel the heat on your face. Sharp and intimate. It has fed you, dried you, smoked you, and spared you. You close it gently, almost respectfully. Above you, the rest of the house is already cold. Under the blankets, though, a brick waits, wrapped in old towel. Your feet find it and sigh without sound. Outside, the wind moves through the hedge like someone speaking another language. Inside, The family settles layer by layer into the dark. You do not sleep deeply, but you sleep warmed by the knowledge that the fire is there, and that everyone you need is within the same walls. The first serious snow does not begin with drama. It begins with a pause. The air in the yard goes still in a way you do not trust. Sound travels oddly. Even the geese in the next field seem to lower their voices. You carry a pail to the pump and notice that the sky is the colour of old pewter, and that the world smells faintly, impossibly, of paper and iron. Before noon there are flakes. By afternoon the lane is blurred. By dusk the fence line has become a suggestion rather than a fact. Snow changes scale. Distances that looked manageable in November become moral questions in December. The walk to the barn is now a campaign. The path to the privy is a matter requiring planning, timing, and courage. The house itself seems to draw inward, as if to protect the centre of itself. Curtains are pinned tighter, towels are pushed against the bottoms of doors. Windows bloom with a lacework of frost on the inside, and you find yourself studying the patterns as if they are maps to somewhere less cold. When the blizzard truly arrives, it makes the ordinary weather of the previous days look polite. Wind takes hold of the house and tests every seam. Snow comes sideways, driven so hard that one cannot tell whether it is falling, flying, or attacking. You wake in the deep part of the night to the sensation of the roof giving one long complaint above you. Not failing, not yet, but reminding everyone below that survival is a conversation between structure and force does not bargain kindly. No one sleeps properly after that. The family gathers in the kitchen, because the kitchen is where decisions can still be made. Candles are lit and protected with jars. Extra blankets are brought down. Your father. And you go out once to check the barn roof, and the cold hits with such violence that it feels personal. Snow packs your boots at once. The lantern flame shudders. The yard has disappeared into one white roaring thing. The barn door opens inward with difficulty, because the drift against it has become almost a wall. Inside, the animals stand close, their warmth rising into the dark rafters. Their eyes follow the lantern with resigned suspicion. Back in the kitchen, people make little rituals because rituals are what the mind does when it needs to remain itself. Your mother sets a candle in the window, even though no traveller could see it through such weather. Your grandmother leaves a saucer of oats near the back threshold, because her own mother used to do the same in storms, and because, she says, a household ought not to be stingy with luck. Your sister builds a nest of blankets under the table, and your brother crawls in after her with a heel of bread and a broken spoon, declaring it the warmest place on earth. For a few minutes, because the wind is so loud, everyone has to speak more closely than usual. That alone makes the room gentler. There are stories on nights like this, not because anyone has energy for entertainment in the cheerful sense, but because story keeps the mind from turning entirely toward the door. Your father tells one about a summer fair, when the pony got loose and dragged a ribbon cart through 3 stalls and a brass band. Your grandmother tells one about a cousin who married for romance, and then spent 30 years complaining about it. Your mother burns a tray of plain biscuits almost intentionally, just enough to scent the room with something that suggests more abundance than actually exists. When she opens the oven, the smell of toasted flour and warmth moves through the kitchen like a blessing that has lowered its standards. By morning, the storm has altered the house from the inside out. Snow has climbed nearly to the sill on the north side. The yard is erased, the lane is gone. You push open the back door against the drift and stare into a world that looks less buried than rewritten. That is when the idea of bringing smaller animals into the house stops sounding absurd and starts sounding practical. A house full of people and livestock would horrify anyone with a preference for order. Winter does not ask for order, it asks for continuance. So in they come, not all at once and not gracefully. 2 piglets first, shivering and opinionated, then a crate of hens, indignant at being handled, and immediately determined to make their displeasure known to every available surface. 1 goat, then another, because once the first is inside, the second makes such a performance in the barn that even your father decides it is not worth pretending he has principles about this. The dog regards the rearrangement as a political crisis. He attempts authority. He is ignored. A farmhouse with animals in it is never merely warmer. It is warmer and stranger, and far less dignified. The pigs discover the best patch of hearth in less than an hour, and arrange themselves there with shameless satisfaction. The hens, after a good deal of fuss, decide the lower pantry shelf is a suitable roost. 1 goat learns by sunset that the curtain near the settled tastes of dust, fabric, and possibility. The house fills with layers of smell so thick they cease to be separate. Straw, smoke, damp wool, kerosene, warm hide, grain, a note of manure. The faint sweetness of porridge, it is not fresh air, but it is life in great steaming abundance, and there is comfort in that. Night inside this improvised menagerie is oddly soft. The pigs snore in small, regular bursts. A hen mutters once and resettles. The goats, so irritating all day, sleep like old ladies after church. The room is warmer than it has been in weeks, not because the fire burns differently, but because life has crowded closer to life. You lie under the quilt with the animal heat moving through the floorboards, and think, not for the first time, that human dignity is a summer habit. Winter replaces it with other virtues, ingenuity, tolerance, the ability to sleep while something with hooves breathes near your stockings. The house is still standing in the morning. This feels less like a fact than a reward. Someone laughs because 1 piglet has tucked itself against the dog's side, and both appear equally offended by the arrangement. Tea is made, the stove is coaxed back to a brighter life. Outside, the snow reaches clean and blinding toward every edge of sight. But inside, the room has adjusted to its own new logic. It is cramped, inconvenient, and a little ridiculous. It is also warm. For 1 long breath at a time, this feels like enough. Then the pump freezes. Of course it does. Winter is never content with 1 difficulty. It likes to return after you have solved something else, and ask what you intend to do without water. You discover it at daybreak. The handle lifts grudgingly, bawls with the wrong sound, and gives nothing. Not a thin trickle, not a sulking cough, nothing. Iron under your glove. White breath in the dark, a silence from the wellhead that feels insulting. You try again because hope is repetitive, still nothing. By the 3rd attempt, you understand that the day has changed its plan for you. From then on, water must be made, snow packed into kettles, ice chipped and melted, every bucket becoming the result of labour rather than the beginning of it. The kitchen turns into a slow workshop of steam, 1 pan on the stove for porridge, another for water, another for broth, if there are bones enough to suggest broth. Snow goes in armfuls, and comes back to almost nothing, a mean little quantity, at the bottom of the iron, as if mocking the effort. You learn quickly that what looks abundant in the yard reduces itself to disappointment indoors. Melt, pour, cool, cover, melt again, carry carefully, set where the hens cannot reach it, shift it away from the piglets who, finding any bucket irresistible, knock 1 over and create an indoor patch of ice so dangerous that your father nearly performs an involuntary dance on the flagstones while carrying a pan. After that, a brick is placed beside every vessel, and everyone becomes a little more solemn around water than around tea. The old ideas of washing shrink with the season. Hands are wiped more than washed. Faces are attended to one cloth at a time. Hair is brushed and braided, and left to make the best of itself. Laundry becomes a negotiation with damp. Sheets can be aired near the stove. Shirts can be turned and worn again. Socks can be propped so close to the heat that they steam without scorching. A true bath becomes the kind of thing discussed nostalgically, like ripe strawberries or open windows. When your grandmother insists on a proper basin wash with rosemary in the water, the scent is pleasant enough to convince everyone, for a few minutes, that civilization has not entirely surrendered. Winter food changes character once the season settles in. In autumn, storage feels abundant because everything is still arriving. In deep winter, the pantry begins to sound different when opened. Less full, more hollow between objects. Every jar moved from shelf to table leaves a small silence behind it. Every bag tied up again feels lighter. There is still food, yes, enough to prevent panic, but not enough to allow carelessness. And carelessness is a luxury as surely as oranges. Breakfast becomes a study in variations on sameness. Oats softened with hot water and a little milk if the goat is cooperative. Bread toasted on a fork and spread with dripping. A spoon of preserve so precious it must be discussed before it is opened. At midday there is soup, often made from what appears to be very little and tastes, by virtue of warmth alone, like something worthy. Carrots one day, onion and barley another. Beans and a scrap of salt the next. The family learns to speak well of meals, not because they are convincing themselves, but because the act of describing food kindly changes how it lands. Your mother can make a pan seem fuller than it is. This is a power no less real for being quiet. She browns onion until the room smells richer than the ingredients deserve. She thickens broth with flour and patience. She bakes a loaf that slices thin but fills the house with such a homely scent that everyone is kinder for an hour. Your grandmother contributes recipes that sound half practical and half mythic. A pie without meat, a pudding without suet, a fritter that is mostly hope held together by flour. Not everything succeeds. One evening, a bean loaf emerges from the oven with the appearance and emotional effect of a roof tile. It is eaten anyway, slowly, under a cover of good manners and weak tea. As scarcity becomes ordinary, desire becomes specific. You do not dream of banquets, you dream of butter, of salt, of the clean sweetness of an apple that has not been stored half the season, of a potato split open with steam still inside it, of warm bread thick enough to tear. Around the stove at night, the family begins to play a game in which each person describes the meal they will have first when winter breaks. Roast lamb, fresh greens, gooseberries, cream, a hard-boiled egg with soft salt. The game is both cruel and comforting, which is perhaps why it lasts. One evening, after a thin stew that pretended to be heartier than it was, your brother says he dreamed of roast chicken glazed with honey. The entire table goes still, not because no one has ever heard of roast chicken, but because the detail is too vivid, too unfairly exact. Honey. There is no honey. There is not even much memory of honey left in the cupboard. Your mother laughs first, quietly, then your sister. Soon everyone is talking over one another about the meals they have known, and the ones they would invent if God and the pantry ever became equally generous. The room warms with imaginary abundance. It is not the same as eating well. but it is a defense against the narrowing of the mind. When the holiday season arrives, it does not look the way songs later pretend it looked. No glossy plenitude, no table bending under meats and sweets. The farmhouse approaches celebration with the same materials it has used for survival: thrift, ceremony, and obstinacy. A bent fir branch is set in a bucket and called a tree because the alternative is not having one. A little coloured paper from old parcels is cut into chains. One surviving ribbon is found in a box and becomes more festive by being reused. Someone polishes an orange until it seems almost luminous and then places it in the middle of the table where everyone can admire it for hours before the idea of cutting it is permitted. The meal itself is ordinary food, made to behave like feast food. Pea pudding, dressed with onions browned until they almost resemble luxury. Potatoes carefully mashed with a little of the best fat. A fruitcake no larger than a saucer, but so rich in meaning that it might as well be plated gold. The safe preserve, opened without debate, bread sliced more generously than sense recommends. For one evening, the family permits itself not to count every spoonful too loudly. This is what ceremony does. It does not create abundance from nothing. It lends shape and dignity to very little, until the little begins to feel, if not ample, then at least shared in the right spirit. After the meal, voices soften. Your grandmother reads from a worn carol book, skipping where the page has gone missing and inventing where memory fails. Your father peels the orange with a slowness usually reserved for surgery. Each segment is handed over like a blessing. The taste is so bright against the winter palate that it seems almost medicinal. Your sister gives crumbs to a hen in her lap, and the hen accepts them with an air of holiday entitlement. Outside the wind has not become kinder. Inside, however, the room has been persuaded for a few hours to feel fuller than it is. That may be the highest form of winter grace. The family sleeps that night with less hunger in the body and more warmth in the mind. It is not triumph, it is not relief that lasts, it is simply a pocket of gentleness kept alive against common sense. When you wake the next morning, the same stove needs feeding, the same water must be melted, the same floor wants sweeping, the same cold still waits behind the door. But something in the house has been steadied. People remember. For a while, not just how to endure, but how to mark time as human beings rather than weathered objects. The long interior part of winter begins after that. Not the first storms, not the obvious hardships, the quieter stretch, the one in which days resemble one another, so closely that memory starts folding them together. This is when letters matter. This is when books matter. This is when the sound of another person's voice, reading aloud, can become a kind of rope, thrown across the dark. On mornings when the sky is too mean for outdoor labour beyond essentials, the kitchen table becomes schoolroom and desk and newsroom all at once. Your sister traces words in an old primer, tongue caught lightly between concentration and annoyance. Your brother writes numbers in a hand so large it appears to be an argument with arithmetic. Your mother sets sums in the margin of a grocer's circular. Your father, who claims not to care for poetry, reads newspaper items aloud with such relish that everyone suspects he enjoys the theatre of them more than he admits. The paper is always old by the time it reaches you, when it reaches you at all. It does not matter. Old news is still news if the snow has been high enough. A fire in London, a bill in Parliament, a railway accident, a recipe, an advertisement for a miraculous stove, no one in the room believes for a moment. Society notices read in your best grand voice. A wedding, a scandal, a woman from a county none of you have seen wearing a hat described as plum-coloured and bold. This last detail produces 10 minutes of speculation, more cheerful than the subject deserves. When the postman appears, he does not look like a civil functionary so much as a creature of weather. Scarf iced at the edge, beard rimed white, boots furred in old snow, pony equally disillusioned. The whole house stirs before he reaches the door, because the sight of mail in winter means not simply correspondence, but proof that roads still exist beyond the drifts, proof that other houses are still lit, proof that the outside world has not decided to move on without you. Letters are opened with a care somewhere between reverence and fear. An aunt complaining about the price of coal in the city. A cousin describing a new baby with the solemnity of a church report. An uncle overseas writing in a hand both familiar and thinner than it used to be, joking about boots, mud, officers, and the deficiencies of army tea in a way that makes everyone laugh and then fall quiet. There is always one letter that is not read aloud in full, one folded and slipped into a pocket or set under a cup until later. This too is part of winter truth. Families share much. Not every burden can be shared at once. Still, the room changes after letters. Conversation stretches farther. The imagination travels. Names are spoken of people not present. Places are mentioned beyond the hedge, beyond the village, beyond the weather. Even the paper itself carries something comforting. The smell of ink and travel, the slight roughness under the finger, the idea that words can cross snow when wagons cannot. That someone far away still pictured this house, this family, this table. It is a powerful thing, being remembered in the cold. Not all outside contact arrives on official business. One afternoon, the tinker appears, dragging behind him a cart so improvised it seems held together by wire, optimism, and stories. He is one of those men who bring with them both repairs and atmosphere. A lid can be fixed, a hinge can be matched, a kettle can be persuaded into one more season of service. But he also carries news, gossip, rumour, oddments, and the brisk authority of someone who has seen 3 roads this week, and therefore believes he understands the world better than anyone snowed in. He sits in the kitchen with his gloves steaming by the stove, and tells of barns blown open on the North Road, of a widow in the next parish breeding geese more successfully than sense would allow, of fever in one valley and a skating accident in another. He takes a cracked ladle, a sticking latch, and a bent warming pan, and returns all 3 in working condition. He accepts payment in beans, mending, and admiration. The children watch him as if he has come from a travelling theatre. In a way he has. He brings motion into a season made of stasis. Between visits and letters and reading, winter continues its less social work. It enters through lungs. It enters through fatigue. Illness often begins with something contemptible. A sniffle, a cough dismissed at breakfast, a child rubbing at one eye with the back of a hand and saying nothing. Then, by evening, there are flushed cheeks and a heat in the skin so unnatural against the season that everyone feels a private tightening in the chest. Your mother takes command of sickness in the way some captains take command of storms. Not with drama, but with total occupation. The kettle goes on. Cloths are wrung out and rewarmed. Herbal bundles come down from rafters. Onion syrup is made. Mustard is mixed into a plaster that smells like argument and old remedies. Blankets are tucked, then retucked. A place by the stove is cleared. Your father says little, but keeps feeding the fire beyond all reason, as if heat itself might be coaxed into doing the work of medicine. When your brother is ill, the whole house changes its breathing to match him. The ordinary sounds remain, but quieter. Even the hens seem more discreet. You sit beside him and read, because the voice helps, and because there is nothing so helpless as caring for someone if your hands are empty. So you fill them with a book and turn pages, a story about a night, a newspaper serial, a bit from a Bible. It does not matter. The words matter less than the steady human sound. He sleeps and wakes and sleeps again in tides. Your grandmother slips a lavender sachet under the pillow and shrugs when asked whether it will help. Help is a broad category in winter. Anything that makes a room feel tended counts. Days like these smell of vinegar, wool, fever, and broth. The broth itself may be mostly water, pretending to be courage, but courage has to start somewhere. Your sister begins to cough as well. Now the house is not only cold-bound, but sick-roomed, and the pressure inside it deepens. Windows cannot be opened long. Fresh air is a philosophy, not a reality. The same heat that comforts also thickens. The same close quarters that preserve warmth circulate worry. Yet still, the tasks go on. Water melted, animals fed, fire banked, soup stirred, beds remade. Care is repetitive, and because it is repetitive, it begins to feel like hope translated into labour. When illness finally loosens, it does so without ceremony. One morning, the fevered person asks for toast. Nothing could sound more miraculous. Toast, something plain enough to prove appetite, has come back honest. Your mother toasts the bread slowly, as if haste might insult recovery. Jam, previously guarded like a family heirloom, is spread with unusual generosity. The sick child eats, the room alters, everyone pretends to remain sensible. But relief moves through the kitchen, like sunlight under a door. Outside, though, winter has not softened its outer edge. The woods begin to feel inhabited by intentions not your own. Tracks appear where there were none the day before. One snare comes back empty and sprung, another vanishes entirely. Something larger than rabbit is moving along the tree line. Not every night, not close enough for certainty, but enough to make you turn your head when evening chores go late. You hear wolves once before you see any sign of them. A long note crossing the dark from far enough away to be elegant and near enough to be unwelcome. It is not the shriek of stories. It is lower, sadder, more practical somehow, hunger in sound form. The goats hear it too, and lift their heads in the barn with a stillness that is almost human. From then on, the yard after dusk feels differently arranged. The same gate, the same fence, the same snow. But beyond the light of the lantern there is a sense of being measured. Morning journeys to the snares become quieter. You carry a stick, not because it is truly adequate, but because empty hands are more frightening. The woods in snow can be beautiful in a way that feels nearly insulting. Branches arched in white, silence lay deep between trunks. Rabbits print slighter stitching, then one larger track in the path where no large track should be, pressed deep, the claws marked cleanly. You crouch, gloved hand near it, and understand not that danger is immediate, but that you are not alone in reading this winter as a test. At home, your father answers the news of tracks by checking latches, inspecting the hen house, moving feed, and saying very little. Practical men reserve many emotions for the shape of their chores. A stronger bar is set across the back door. A lantern is kept filled. Your sister asks whether wolves ever come up to the house. You tell her not often. Everyone in the room hears the not more loudly than the often. That night, the hens are brought in earlier than usual, and no one argues. If winter's dangers were only outside, endurance would be simpler. But by late season, things inside begin to fray as well. Boots give way at the seam, mittens thin at the fingertips. The horse blanket tears where it rubs the stall. A chair lists, a shutter comes loose. The oven hinge starts to complain. You begin to understand that one of the most important winter skills is not harvesting or chopping or preserving. It is mending, the refusal to let an object give up before you do. So the evenings turn toward repair. The table becomes a workshop. Leather laid out, yarn sorted, needles found and refound. Your mother turns cuffs and hems. Your sister patches an apron with cloth from an older, brighter dress. Your father, all thumbs in summer, stitches a strap with the ferocious concentration of a man who distrusts sewing and therefore treats it like warfare. Your grandmother, who could probably mend a storm if it sat still long enough, restores 2 mittens and a boot top in the time it takes everyone else to discuss the problem. There is a great deal of quiet in mending, but it is not an empty quiet. It is full of little sounds that come to mean safety. Thread through cloth, scissors closing, someone biting the end of yarn, the low narration of a folk tale read aloud, the occasional sharp yelp, when your brother pricks his finger because he continues to reject the thimble on principle and pain. The fire folds in on itself with soft clicks. Outside the wind still wanders the eaves. Inside, people bring things back from almost broken to almost whole. That is enough. A patched thing has a beauty of its own, not the beauty of novelty, but the beauty of permission. This can go on. This can do one more season. This can still keep the weather out. By lantern light, the curtain with the red scrap in one corner, the boot with the darker leather at the toe, the coat with one mismatched button and one invisible darn, all begin to look not shabby but faithful. You sit with your own boot in your lap, drawing coarse thread through old leather, and feel that peculiar satisfaction that comes from resisting waste with your hands. There are other long afternoons in that deep part of winter when the weather does not exactly trap you indoors, but persuades you not to waste your strength outside. On such days the house becomes an entire little country. The kitchen table turns from schoolroom to mending bench to card table to writing desk without anyone formally deciding it. A loaf cools on the sill. A shawl hangs near the stove. Your mother sits with the accounts and makes the same small sum of flour. Candles, coal, soap and feed look possible in 3 different ways before she chooses the least impossible one. Your father planes a splintered handle smooth enough for another season. Your sister practices a hand too elegant for her age on the back of an envelope. Your brother, who cannot bear stillness for more than 1/4 of an hour at a time, carves a tiny wooden horse and gives it such determined, crooked dignity that everyone agrees it deserves a proper name. The candle hours have their own tempo. Reading aloud is one part of it, but there is also that quieter work of listening to the house and to one another. The roof pops as snow settles. The kettle thinks out loud in soft metallic mutterings. Someone turns a page. Someone sighs. The dog dreams with little running paws. You learn again that company does not always require speech. Sometimes it is enough that every chair is occupied and every pair of hands is doing something minor and useful. Winter can make people irritable. Certainly, it can wear patience thin as old cuffs, but it can also bring families into a nearness that other seasons never demand. Where moods are visible as weather and kindness, when it appears, lands all the more gently for being needed. There are lessons in these afternoons that no one would think to call lessons. How to splice old cord with new. How to save candle stubs for one final use. How to fold newspaper into the toes of boots for extra warmth. How to smell when bread has gone from pale to done without opening the oven. How to look at a quilt and know which patch came from whose dress. How to tell from the behaviour of the hens whether another cold snap is building. How to hear in the tone of a cough whether a person merely needs rest or whether the whole household ought to begin rearranging itself around a sick bed. Such knowledge is never announced. It passes from hand to hand, eye to eye, winter to winter, until people carry it without noticing the weight. Toward evening, when candlelight makes faces seem both softer and older, stories become stranger. Not the cheerful sort told on blizzard nights to keep fear from swelling, but the slower stories that belong to the season of waiting. Your grandmother remembers a winter before you were born, when the river froze hard enough for 2 carts to cross, and an idiot from the village tried it, with a piano on the back. Your father tells of a farm farther north where the sheep once learned to crowd against the byre door at dusk, before a storm, forecasting weather more accurately than any almanac. Your mother tells the family history, in practical details, which is how women often preserve the true shape of the past. Not dates and grand declarations, but which aunt could bake with one eye closed, which cousin always cracked her teacup in frosty weather, which grandfather trusted no rooster unless it crowed before the church clock. You begin to feel, in these low hours, that winter does not only take, it reveals, it shows which chair everyone drifts to when tired, which person is quickest to laugh when spirits sink, which jar in the pantry no one opens until someone else is ill, which song your sister hums when frightened, which silence means your father is worried, and which silence merely means he is thinking with his hands. All of these become part of the season's private map. One morning, after a run of hard nights, the sky clears with such brilliance that the whole yard looks made of ground glass. It is beautiful in the rude way winter sometimes is, when it has done nothing to deserve admiration, and receives it anyway. The roofs shine white, the hedges glitter, every track made yesterday has frozen into sharp history. You go to the barn with a pail, and find even the latch colder than seems possible. The animals accept the morning with mixed philosophy. The cows endure, the pony complains, the goats appear to believe the weather should have consulted them. The trough in the barn has filmed over again, and the task becomes one you know by now too well. Warming water enough for animals without wasting the household's own. You carry half buckets, break ice, pour, wait, carry again. By the time the cows have drunk and the goats have sloshed their usual disapproval across the floor, your sleeves are stiff and your fingers ache from the particular cold that comes with wet work. But the barn has one comfort the house sometimes lacks: animal steadiness. They need what they need: hay, water, dry bedding, a hand on a neck for a moment. They do not speculate about next month. They do not count potatoes in their minds at 3 in the morning. In their company, the day can feel simpler. Your father begins cutting straw shorter for bedding because he says the packed kind holds warmth better. Whether he is right or merely prefers to be busy, no one can tell. Busy men and correct men look much alike in January. You help spread fresh straw through the stalls, and the barn changes at once from sharp and mean to merely cold. The pony noses your shoulder for no reason but habit. One cow turns her large solemn head and exhales into the sleeve of your coat. Steam, sweet breath, a smell of hay and hide. It is strangely comforting to be mistaken for part of the furniture. The walk back to the house is worse because returning from any workable task to the open yard always reminds you how much the wind dislikes human plans. Yet once inside, with the door barred and boots kicked against the scraper and your hands finally held close to the stove, you feel again that peculiar inward settling which can only happen after outdoor labour. There is porridge thickening. There is tea so weak it might qualify as a memory of tea, but it is hot. There are people. There is the day continuing in recognizable forms. This is one of winter's hidden mercies. The ordinary can feel luxurious when so much of the world is inhospitable. As the weeks pass, the family develops 100 tiny customs for keeping spirits level. One of them is to name the weather as if it were a difficult relation. The wind from the east is Aunt Mercy, because once it arrives, it stays too long and criticizes everything. The sleet is called the bookkeeper, because it counts every opening in the walls. A certain pale, cruelly bright dawn is known as the parson, because it looks clean and then behaves harshly. It is silly, and therefore useful. To joke with the season is to cut it down to a size the mind can manage. Another custom, which perhaps began in earnest only this winter, is the evening of letters not yet sent. Paper is too precious to waste freely, and stamps never seem to multiply in the drawer, but once every week or so after supper the family sits and composes messages anyway. Some will be posted, some will remain folded in the Bible, or tucked inside a recipe book, because the act of writing matters, even if delivery does not. Your mother writes to a cousin she has not seen in 7 years, and includes a page and a half on turnips, because in winter one reports what winter is made of. Your sister writes to a school friend, and spends longer choosing a proper opening than she spends on the body of the letter. Your father writes in brief, dense lines, all information and no ornament, yet everyone can hear his affection through the bluntness. You, sometimes, write to no one specific at all. You write because it is a way of arranging the season into sentences, which makes it feel less endless. There are visits from neighbours too, though only when weather and necessity can be persuaded into the same morning. A woman from down the lane comes one afternoon with yeast starter wrapped in cloth and leaves, with a jar of beans and the details of 3 households' ailments. A boy from the far farm arrives to borrow a chain and stays for soup, because the road back has drifted over worse than expected. 2 men pause with a sled and drink tea standing by the door, because their boots carry too much thawed filth for the kitchen, and because men of that sort rarely sit, unless sick or married into a more orderly family. None of these visits last long, none are grand, but each one broadens the walls a little. Isolation is never absolute while there are still faces appearing in the yard. By late winter, when one has looked at the same shelves and the same window panes long enough, even modest novelty acquires the force of entertainment. This is why the idea of a village gathering, half dance and half defiance, feels almost implausible when the invitation arrives. Not on cream card, of course, on a scrap of brown paper brought by a neighbour's son whose nose is red with speed and cold, the pencil already smudged where someone's mitten brushed it. All on Friday, if weather allows, music if Mr. Sayer's fiddle has not cracked. Tea, if anyone brings leaves. Fire if the stove draws. It sounds less like a promise than a wager, but the rest of that day, the thought of it glows in the house like a coal under ash. A dance, in weather that makes a trip to the privy feel heroic. It is ridiculous, which is one reason everyone wants it. Your mother opens the cedar chest and draws out garments that have spent the winter sleeping beneath a smell of wood oil and memory. Your sister finds a dress that has grown shorter on her since last year, and decides, as all determined young women have decided in every century, that this is a problem for no one. Your brother is brushed so thoroughly he protests as if being polished for market. Your father puts one decent button back on his best coat, and then pretends not to care whether it sits straight. Even your grandmother arranges a ribbon at her collar with the expression of someone confronting history. The journey to the hall is made in that peculiar combination of discomfort and anticipation only winter gatherings produce. Everyone walks carefully, not wanting to arrive lame from the ice before the music has even begun. Breath hangs silver. Lanterns move along the lane, impatient little constellations. Snowbanks rise on either side where earlier storms have been shoveled and abandoned. By the time the hall comes into view, yellow at the windows and leaking warmth at the door, it looks less like a building than like an argument against the season. Inside, the air is transformed by simple things done all at once. A stove roaring too hard, wet coats steaming, pine boughs tucked where nails could be found, a table carrying whatever each household could spare, a seed cake, a crock of pickles, dried apples, bread, a dish of something brown and hopeful, a kettle of tea strengthened more by goodwill than by leaves. Mr. Sayer's fiddle has indeed survived, though perhaps only through temperament. He tunes by ear, muttering at the strings. Someone else produces a concertina that sounds as if it has been kept in a barn. It does not matter. The first reel begins, and the room remembers what bodies are for. Besides work, you dance badly and happily, which is the proper standard for such evenings. Everyone is slightly out of practice, and no one cares. Boots stamp, skirts brush, laughter rises at every near collision. A shy pair miss a turn, and end up facing the wrong wall. Two children invent a dance of their own in a corner, and call it superior. Your mother, who has spent months moving between stove, bed and pantry, suddenly looks younger while turning in your father's arms under lantern light. Your grandmother keeps time from her chair with one bent hand, and a face that says people today rush the best parts. The room smells of wet wool, hot metal, tea, and human relief. What winter takes from people in privacy, gatherings like this return in company. Not food exactly, though there is food, not warmth exactly, though there is that too, something more elusive, proportion. Perhaps the knowledge that your household is not the only one that has had hens on the wrong shelf, or boots mended past reason, or children asleep by a fire before the dishes were done. Stories get exchanged between dances. This family's pump froze twice. That farm lost half a haystack to wind. Someone's aunt produced a sausage from nowhere at Christmas and will not explain herself. Someone else insists there were fox tracks by the smithy that looked almost like handwriting. The details are funny because they are true enough. When you finally walk home, the cold waiting outside the hall is no less cold than before, yet it lands differently on a mind reminded of other minds. Laughter stays in the body for a while, like leftover heat. The stars above the lane are sharp and numberless, snow creaks underfoot. Your brother falls asleep, almost upright once he is home. One boot still on. The kitchen, when you return to it, seems both smaller and dearer. The goat glances up from her nest by the stove, as if to ask where everyone has been wasting perfectly good sitting time. You hang your coat, hold your hands a moment to the fire, and realize that companionship can change even the shape of a room you thought you knew completely. The next weeks are full again of ordinary winter, but something from the gathering lingers. Song, perhaps, or the memory of bodies moving for joy instead of necessity. The family hums more while working. Your sister practices a turn when she thinks no one sees. Your father catches himself tapping a rhythm on the table and looks almost embarrassed by the evidence. Such moments matter precisely because they leave no record except in mood. There is another practical challenge waiting, because winter never quite forgives happiness without sending you back to a task. Behind the barn sits the ice pit your father improvised in late autumn, lined with straw and boards, and all the confidence a man can nail together in half a week. For a time it served well enough, holding butter hard preserving a side of pork, keeping milk from deciding too quickly what it wanted to become. But prolonged cold and then a brief false thaw have turned a place temperamental. Now, one morning, your father returns from it, carrying not merely meat, but a slab of history encased in ice and resentment. The ham, or what is meant one day to become dinner, has frozen itself into the condition of a geological find. It sits in the pail by the stove, with a sheen like old glass, more artifact than meal. Your father attacks it first with a knife, then with stern language, then with a ladle of hot water. Everyone contributes advice, which is useless and therefore plentiful. Your grandmother says, leave it, and let patience do its work. Your brother suggests the axe, your mother vetoes the axe, before anyone gets ideas about splinters in supper. So the kitchen becomes, for half a day, the site of a careful thawing operation. You turn the meat, pour more warm water, chip at the edge. Wait. The dog sits in total concentration, convinced Providence has finally remembered him. The room smells of salt, straw, hot metal, and longing. It is a curious winter lesson, learning that food can fail by being too cold as easily as by being too warm. Pitt, so clever in theory, has done its work almost too well. When at last the surface yields and the first reasonable slice can be taken, everyone looks at it with an admiration completely disproportionate to the size of the thing. Later, when it is fried in a little butter, with sage and served beside stale bread made grateful by fat, the meal feels almost indecently rich. There is always some household mechanism requiring this sort of negotiation with the season. A hinge that swells, a latch that snaps in brittle weather, the jam press that sticks, the oven draft that changes when the wind comes from the north. Your father often says a farm is simply a collection of things nearly breaking at all times. In summer one laughs, in winter one listens, yet the listening has its own reward. When the wrong sound appears in a house and you can name it, fear loses part of its authority. A knock in the shutters, a drip under the back stair, the clink that means the kettle lid has warped again. Knowing is a kind of comfort, late in the season, after the illnesses have passed, and before thaw has truly begun. The nights can feel longest. Not because they are longest by the clock, but because the body has grown tired of darkness. These are the nights when you go out to the barn with a lantern, and find the snow no longer beautiful, only watchful. The drifts are greyed at the edges. The moon, when there is one, throws enough light to turn every fence post into a figure, and every thicket into speculation. Your boots make a hollow sound over old crust. The lantern swings. Breath goes before you. From somewhere beyond, the far hedge comes once, and then again, that low running note of wolves. Not close enough to panic, close enough to remind in such moments, courage is not a glorious thing. It is merely the act of continuing toward the barn, because the animals need feeding, whether fear has sharpened or not. You push in through the door, and stand among familiar smells until your pulse remembers proportion. Hay, warm hide, damp timber, one goat looking at you with unreasonable trust. The wolves remain outside the human circle of light. This too is part of the winter bargain. You are not the only hungry life moving through the season. You are only the life inside the lantern ring, carrying pails and tasks, and the stubborn wish to keep all that is yours still breathing until morning. When you return to the house after such rounds, the relief is so immediate it is almost tender. The latch falls into place, the stove glows, someone has left a mug near the hob for whoever came in last. The room smells of bread crusts and sleeping people. It is impossible not to love a house a little after re-entering it from that kind of dark. You set the lantern down, remove gloves stiff with cold, Stand for a moment with one hand against the settle or the table, grounding yourself among known shapes. This is the safe heart returning after expenditure. This is why homes mattered so fiercely in winters like these. Not because they were perfect, but because they were where fear changed temperature. Toward the very end of the season, when everyone is worn but more hopeful than they dare say, there is a run of evenings devoted almost entirely to making things ready for the world to widen again. Seeds are sorted, harness checked, the better tools chosen out, and the hopeless ones admitted to the burn pile. Your mother empties the medicine shelf and laughs softly at how many paper packets of dried leaves the winter consumed. Your grandmother refolds old letters with that ceremony elderly hands sometimes reserve for the proof that life has been longer than one season. Your sister decides the kitchen curtains need one more patch before spring sunlight reveals all their failures. Your brother asks whether the pigs remember that they are livestock and not family. No one answers quickly. The mood of the house changes in these preparations. Still tired, yes. Still careful with stores, yes. But changed. The future has begun to take up space at the table alongside the next meal. There is talk of pruning, of market days, of whether the marigold seeds saved from a neighbour might take near the fence, of which field drains worst in thaw, of whether one good hen might be set to brood if warmth holds. These are not grand plans, that is why they feel trustworthy. They belong to the old rural genius for imagining tomorrow through chores. And so, when the first proper signs of release finally come, they do not arrive to an empty house. They arrive to a household already leaning toward them, ready to recognize them for what they are. A drip from the eaves, a patch of yard no longer iron hard underfoot, a smell under the smell of smoke, the sense that the world has not become kind exactly, but negotiable. That is enough to begin. Then the season changes by sound before it changes by sight. One morning, cup in hand, you hear it, a drip, then another, a small wet tapping from somewhere near the eaves. The roof gives a different kind of groan now, not under fresh load, but under release. Icicles begin to shine at the edges. The packed path to the yard loses its certainty and becomes first slick, then slushy, then treacherous in a whole new way. Winter, having spent months being hard, now becomes messy. Thaw is not the opposite of struggle. It is struggle translated into mud. Water discovers every flaw in a property faster than wind ever could. The yard turns from hard white to brown confusion. The pig pen becomes an argument between earth and soup. Channels must be dug to guide, melt away from the house. Buckets emptied, straw shifted, wood raised. The barn roof, which survived snow, now has to survive wet. Everything seems to sag, drip, soften, release or smell more honestly than before. Still, the world is changing in your favour even while it looks its worst. The air coming through a cracked window no longer cuts the lungs. It smells of wet boards, earth, old straw and possibility. Your sister shakes bedding outside, and for the first time in months there is no fear it will freeze solid before noon. Your mother attacks the pantry shelves with vinegar and hot water, sorting the brave jars from the cloudy ones, the useful from the suspicious, the hopeful from the obviously beyond mercy. Your father opens the coop and begins rebuilding what winter bowed. The chickens, restored to a degree of self-respect by lengthening light, offer loud advice, and one excellent egg laid in a place so inconvenient that it can only be interpreted as commentary. Spring cleaning on a farm like this is less a cheerful custom than a military campaign waged against the evidence of winter. Floors scrubbed, walls wiped where soot allows, hooks and rails cleared, the windows once cleaned, transform the room so dramatically that everyone pauses at least once to admire the way sunlight now enters it. Real sunlight, not the white glare of snow reflecting judgment from outside, but gold. Dust becomes visible and suddenly forgivable. Even the animals look less like exiles and more like themselves. The fields, however, remain deceptive. There is always the danger of trusting thaw too early. One warm day means nothing. 2 are suspicious. 3 begin to tempt. Your grandmother refuses to call it spring until the air smells right, and one certain bird returns to the hedge. Yet, plans begin anyway, because plans are the first true luxury after endurance. Seed packets are found and counted, the shovel heads are checked, a broken rake handle is replaced. Your father stands over the garden plot, as if in conversation with the soil, and though he says little, his face alters in a way you have not seen since before Christmas. Calculation, returning to hope. Even the body changes under lengthening light. You wake earlier, not from cold, but from brightness, slipping through the curtain. Your shoulders do not rise at once in self-protection. The stove is lit smaller, later. One morning a window is left open by accident, and nobody notices for 10 whole minutes. This is how seasons truly turn, not in announcements, but in tolerances. The first proper birdsong feels almost rude, after so much quiet. Bold and bright and unnecessary, in the best way. You stand in the yard, listening, as if the sound were something visible and flying just above your head. The goat, who has spent half the winter inventing grievances, pushes through the half-open gate with the energy of a soul resurrected. The pigs find a patch of warmth and commit themselves to it with religious seriousness. The hens, no longer persuaded that life is over, scratch the loosened earth and produce eggs with renewed confidence, each one greeted at the table with a respect formerly reserved for correspondence from distant relatives. Planting begins as soon as the ground allows enough steel into it. The first shovel, pushed into soft soil after months of frost, has a feeling almost impossible to exaggerate. The earth gives, dark, cold, alive. Not kind exactly, but willing again. You work the plot in rows, turning clods, lifting roots, choosing where onions will go, where greens might risk the cool, where later crops can be imagined, even if not yet trusted. Your sister follows with seeds in a tin, pressing them down with fingers that were stiff with cold for half a year, and now look oddly capable of summoning life. With the first sowing done, the whole farm seems to inhale differently. Tasks that would have felt impossible in January now feel merely long. Fences leaned by wind and drift are lifted and reset. Gate hinges are scraped free of rust and re-oiled. The chicken run, which winter had reduced to a moral lesson in mud, is raked, mended, and spread with fresh straw until it resembles a respectable place again. Your father spends a morning straightening one wall of the shed, with the concentration of a man correcting a personal insult. Your mother empties the last ash from the great winter bucket, and says, with the seriousness of ritual, that perhaps now it may remain empty for a day or two at a time. No one laughs, because everyone understands what an achievement that would be. Laundry returns to the world outdoors in cautious stages. At first, only the sturdier things, towels, aprons, work shirts too humble to complain if another cold snap catches them. The line in the yard, which all winter held only surrendered socks and the occasional frozen rag, is suddenly busy with cloth moving in real air. You stand beneath it with the basket on your hip and watch sunlight push through clean linen as wind lifts it. It is difficult not to feel that something ceremonial is happening. Even washing, after a season of compromise, can look triumphant. The smells of the house change as doors stay open longer. Smoke still lives in the beams. It probably always will. But now it shares space with soap, wet earth, and that green scent carried in from the yard on boots and hems. The floors are scrubbed one more time, not from necessity alone, but from a kind of impatience with winter's residue. Under the settle and behind the chest, and along the pantry skirting boards, the season had left traces of itself. Ash, feathers, dust, straw, old drips of tallow, one lost button, 3 hazelnuts no one remembers owning, and enough goose down from some ancient pillow to outfit a small dignitary. You sweep and wipe and laugh at the archaeology of domestic life. The animals feel the turn of the year as surely as anyone. The cows begin to shift their weight toward the field before the gate is even unlatched, as if their hooves can smell pasture waiting beyond the muck. The hens, having regained confidence, go looking for scandalous places to lay, and must be searched for eggs with the concentration of detectives. The pigs rediscover joy in mud with such shameless abandon that your brother says they have mistaken themselves for noblemen on holiday. The goats, naturally, begin planning escape routes the instant the yard offers anything edible and new. One afternoon, a kid from the neighbouring farm is brought by for an hour while its owner repairs a cartwheel, and the sudden springy nonsense of that little creature, bouncing from stone to step to bucket, makes the whole kitchen feel younger. There are errands again, once the lane can be trusted by cart. Not easy errands, not pleasant ones, always, but movement. Your father goes to the village for nails, salt and news that has not travelled through 3 households before reaching yours. He returns with a coil of rope, 2 papers, a packet of onion seed, and a detailed account of a roof collapse that happened in February, but is only now being discussed properly because everyone concerned survived. Your mother sends a parcel of knitted things and dried herbs to a cousin who had a week winter confinement. Your sister receives, with more excitement than she attempts to hide, a note folded small and slipped inside the newspaper by a girl from the dance. It contains no great revelation, only gossip, a drawing of a fiddle, and the statement that Mr. Sayer played better after his second cup of tea than after his first. Still, the note is read 4 times. The first market morning after winter always feels a little like stepping back onto a stage you had forgotten existed. The cartwheels no longer groan in frozen ruts, but roll through softer ground with that heavy spring drag of mud and purpose. You travel with eggs, a little cheese, 2 jars of preserves saved from the bottom shelf, and a list longer than the money in your pocket would advise. At market, the air is full of damp coats, horse sweat, turnips, fresh gossip, and the subtle public relief of people who have all come through weather hard enough to be worth discussing. Faces look thinner, voices look lovelier. There is a kind of politeness in how everyone asks after one another's winter, because no one wants too quickly to know the answer. Yet there are also smiles too immediate to fake, bargains struck more warmly than before, and that rural understanding that anyone upright in March deserves a certain respect. You come home from such days, tired in a different way from winter tired, not hollowed, not weather-beaten, simply used. The house receives you with less desperation now. It is no longer a fortress so much as a base of operations. A place to return to, yes, but not the only habitable patch of the known world. The threshold is crossed with boots, muddy rather than frozen. The stove is lit because supper wants it, not because life itself insists. These distinctions are small in words and enormous in feeling. Evening leisure changes too. Candles are spared because the daylight stays. Reading moves closer to the window. Mending gives way little by little to making. A new apron cut, a harness strap punched, a gate latch improved, a box built for seed potatoes. Your brother fashions a whistle from elder wood and produces 3 notes so shrill the hens object from the yard. Your grandmother, who has spent months warning everyone against premature joy, at last takes her chair to the doorstep and declares the son respectable. Coming from her, this is nearly poetry. There are setbacks, of course, because spring in old farming country was never sentimental. A late frost nips one row of greens. A cart axle protests on the road back from the mill. A leak discovered in the shed roof turns a corner of feed into a mouldy cautionary tale. Yet even these mishaps belong to a living season. They do not carry the deadening authority of midwinter. You face them standing up in open air, with more daylight left after the trouble than before it. That alone changes the spirit entirely. One evening rain comes. Not as sleet, not as needled misery, but as rain, proper and plain. It drums on the roof with a softness so unfamiliar that for a minute everyone in the kitchen falls silent. Winter rain had always threatened ice. This rain promises growth. Your mother stops with her hands in the dough and listens. Your father looks toward the window with the expression of a man hearing from an old friend. The smell that follows, rising from the yard and the fields beyond, is rich enough to make even the dog lift his nose in wonder. Wet earth, not snow, not ash, earth. It enters the house like a message from the months ahead. There is a moment one afternoon when you climb the rise behind the barn simply to look. The valley below is not yet beautiful in the grand sense. Too much mud, too many broken stalks, too many repairs still waiting, but there is motion everywhere that winter had forbidden. Water in the stream instead of ice, smoke from chimneys, lifting rather than flattening. A horse in the far field, stepping through grass, not snow. The line of trees softening at the tips, the sky itself altered, blue not in theory but in fact. Standing there, you feel an unclenching that has nothing to do with posture. For months, the world above you has been a source of threat. Now you look up and do not immediately measure it for damage. That may be the truest end of winter, not the disappearance of cold, because cold lingers. Not the last snow, because last snows are liars. Not the calendar, not even the first seed in the ground. It is the moment the body no longer fears the sky with every glance. The evenings remain cool, and the family still lights the stove, but it is a smaller fire now, lit for comfort more often than rescue. Windows stay open longer. The room breathes. Your mother folds linens that smell not only of soap and smoke, but of outside air. Your father sharpens tools for ploughing by lantern light that seems more companionable than defensive. Your brother reads from last year's almanac, in a voice grand enough for prophecy. Your sister falls asleep with sun in her cheeks instead of fever or stove heat. The dog chooses the doorway over the hearth, as if he too wishes to keep one eye on the changed world. You think back, not theatrically, but with that slow astonishment people feel when they survive something through repetition and only later understand how much it asked. The harvesting before frost, the cellar shelves, the coal dust, the animals indoors, the frozen pump, the holiday orange, the letters, the fevers, the tracks at the edge of the wood, the boot in your lap under lamplight, all those small scenes, none of them magnificent alone, and together they make a bridge over a season that might otherwise have swallowed a household whole. That is the overlooked shape of a hard winter. It is not one grand trial. It is 1,000 ordinary acts done in sequence. Someone carries, someone chops, someone stirs, someone watches a child through the night, someone writes, someone rends, someone remembers where the good jar of preserves was hidden, someone laughs at supper when supper is nothing to laugh at. Someone puts a candle in the window no traveller will see. Someone keeps doing the next thing until the world softens. And now it has softened, not all at once, not enough to trust recklessly, but enough. The mud on your boots is spring mud. The damp at the threshold is not from snow tracked in, but from thaw and traffic and life moving freely again. The house itself seems lighter, relieved of the pressure of holding every ounce of warmth inside its walls. Even silence has changed. It is no longer the muffled isolation of heavy drifts. It is the evening quiet of work completed and more possible tomorrow. So you sit for a while at the open door and let the cool air move over your face. Beyond the yard, the field is no longer white, only rough and brown and waiting. Beyond that, hedges. Beyond that, the lane passable again. Somewhere far off a cart goes by. Somewhere close, a hen complains, a goat answers, and a human voice from inside the house calls your name without urgency. The season has turned enough that voices can sound ordinary again. You do not need a dramatic ending when the true gift is gentler than that. Winter has not been conquered, it has merely stepped back. It will come again 1 year, and when it does, there will be wood to stack and jars to fill, and boots to mend and small plans to make beneath the large sky. But not tonight. Tonight there is damp earth in the yard, a slower fire on the stove, and the long-tired ease that comes when a family realizes it has reached the far side of something difficult without ever needing to announce its bravery. So stay here a little longer in the doorway of this Edwardian spring, with your patched boots drying nearby and the scent of soil rising from the fields. Let the house behind you murmur in low domestic notes. Let the light thin slowly and kindly. Let the season end the way it really would have ended for people like these. Not with a final flourish, but with labour easing into rest, with weather easing into possibility, with the body easing out of vigilance. The sky is still overhead, but it is no longer something to fear. And for now, for one soft and earned evening, that is more than enough.